The smell was the first thing. Cardboard and dust. The smell of a life packed up and moved. I stood in the middle of our new living room, the echo of my own breathing loud in the empty space. Sunlight cut through the grimy window panes, illuminating a galaxy of floating dust motes. Liam was on his knees in the corner, cursing under his breath at a tangle of wires. "Got a signal yet?" I asked, my voice bouncing off the bare plaster walls. He grunted, not looking up. The red light on the new router blinked mockingly. "This thing's a piece of junk. I told them we needed the fiber optics set up. Did they listen?" "No. They sent a college kid out with a coax cable from 1995. I smiled. His frustration was a familiar comfort. I nudged a box labeled Kitchen Fragile with my foot. Inside, our lives waited in a nest of newspaper. Mugs we'd bought on a trip to the coast. Plates from our wedding registry. 6 years of memories all smelling of cardboard and dust. "Just think," I said, walking over to the window and rubbing a clean circle in the grime with my thumb. "No more Mrs. Henderson from accounting asking me if my TPS reports have the new cover sheets. No more gray walls. No more listening to Brian clip his fingernails in the next cubicle." Liam sighed, finally giving up on the wires and leaning back on his heels. "No more 2-hour commute." He looked up at me, his face softening. "This is it, Chloe? For real this time?" "For real," I echoed, the words feeling solid in my mouth. I left him to his technological war and went upstairs. The bedroom was the largest room, with a wide window overlooking the overgrown backyard. Our mattress lay in the middle of the floor like a pale island. I'd get the boxes of sheets and pillows next. But first, a quick sweep. The previous owners had left the place broom clean, which was a generous description. I found the broom in the hall closet and started on the hardwood floors of the bedroom. The rhythmic scrape and whisk were satisfying. Old dust bunnies, a dead fly, a bent paperclip, the debris of a forgotten life. I worked my way across the room, the pile of dust growing in front of the bristles. That's when I heard it. A small sound, a soft tick. I stopped sweeping. In the center of the clean patch of floor I had just passed, something small and white sat. I leaned the broom against the wall and walked over. It was a marble, not glass, but old porcelain, the color of milk. A single faint swirl of blue was embedded in its surface, like a vein. It was perfectly round, perfectly smooth. I picked it up. It was heavy for its size. "Liam?" I called out. His voice floated up the stairs. "Yeah? Did you drop a marble or something up here?" A pause. "A what? No. Why?" "There's one on the floor. A white one." I walked to the top of the stairs holding it in my palm. "Probably the old owner's kid. It's an old house, hon. Stuff gets lost under the floorboards for decades. Probably just got knocked loose." His logic was sound. Of course it was. I looked at the smooth, cool object in my hand. What should I do with it? Toss it. We've got enough of our own junk to deal with. He was right. It was just a piece of trash. I walked back into the bedroom, meaning to find a bin. Instead, I saw a small gap where the floorboards met the wall beneath the window. Without thinking, I knelt and flicked the marble with my thumb. It rolled into the dark space and disappeared, out of sight. The evening came on quickly. The house settled around us, its unfamiliar groans and creaks becoming more pronounced in the dark. We'd managed to get the bed made, and had eaten pizza sitting on the floor, our backs against the wall. Liam had finally won his battle with the router, and was now downstairs, probably scrolling through sports news on his phone. I was in the upstairs bathroom, the one connected to our bedroom. The water was running, the pressure surprisingly good. I squeezed toothpaste onto my brush and started the monotonous circular motions. The minty foam filled my mouth. The hum of the house was a low thrum beneath the sound of the running faucet. Then, another noise. A faint click-clack on wood. I stopped brushing, my hand frozen mid-circle. I listened. Nothing. Just the water. I must have imagined it. I went back to brushing. Click-clack-clack. This time it was unmistakable. It came from right outside the bathroom door. I spat the foam into the sink, rinsed my mouth quickly, and wiped my hand on my jeans. I turned off the faucet. The sudden quiet was heavy. I looked down. There, on the dusty hardwood of the hallway, perfectly centered on the threshold of the bathroom door, was the porcelain marble. My blood went cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. It couldn't be. I had pushed it into a crack in the floor, on the other side of the room. I took a hesitant step out of the bathroom. It didn't move. It just sat there, a milky white eye on the dark wood. "Liam?" I called. My voice was tight. Down here! His voice was muffled by the floor. He was still downstairs. He hadn't come up. I scanned the hallway. The door to the guest room was closed. The door to the attic at the end of the hall was shut tight. I walked over to the window on the landing. It was an old sash window, painted shut years ago by the looks of it. No draft. The air was perfectly still. I knelt, my knees cracking. I reached out a trembling hand and picked it up. The cold was shocking. It felt like it had been plucked from a bucket of ice water. A deep, unnatural cold that seemed to suck the warmth right out of my fingertips. I stood up, the marble clutched in my fist. My hand was shaking. This wasn't right. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A slope in the floor? A draft from somewhere I couldn't see? But how did it get out from under the wall? How did it roll uphill to the doorway? What? No, I wasn't going to play this game. I marched down the stairs, each step a heavy thud. The marble felt like a stone in my hand. Liam was in the living room, the blue light of his phone illuminating his face. He didn't look up. I walked past him, into the dark kitchen. I didn't turn on the light. I stepped on the pedal for the trash can. The lid opened with a loud squeak. Inside was the greasy cardboard of the pizza box, and some empty cans. I opened my fist and dropped the marble in. It hit a can with a light tink, then settled among the garbage. I let the lid close. I took a deep breath. It's done. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I put my foot on the bottom stair. Kang! The sound was sharp, clear. It came from directly behind me. It wasn't the sound of something settling in the trash. It was the sound of porcelain hitting hardwood. I froze, one foot on the stair. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to just go up the stairs and lock the bedroom door. But I had to know. Slowly, I turned my head. It was at the foot of the stairs, not 2 feet from where I stood. It had come to rest right where the runner from the living room met the wood of the entryway, as if it had been waiting for me. My breath hitched in my throat. I tried to speak, to call Liam's name, but my mouth was dry, my tongue thick. Nothing came out but a choked gasp. I took a step back, then another, my eyes locked on the small white sphere. It didn't move. It didn't have to. Chloe? Liam's voice made me jump. He was standing in the archway to the living room, a bottle of beer in his hand. His brow was furrowed with concern. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't answer. I just pointed with a shaking finger. His eyes followed my direction. He saw the marble. A look of annoyance crossed his face. It wasn't fear. It was just weariness. Oh, for Christ's sake, this again? He walked over and bent down, picking it up without a moment's hesitation. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger. Han, the floors are probably warped. It's a 100-year-old house. It rolls, that's all. I threw it in the trash, Liam, I whispered, the words finally finding their way out. I heard it hit the cans. And then, it was here. He sighed, a long, tired sound. He was trying to be patient. I could see it. Okay, look. A draft from under the door. The floor settles. The can shifted. 1,000 things could have happened. You're just tired. We're both beat. He walked to the front door, the heavy oak one we'd admired when we first saw the house. He twisted the deadbolt and pulled it open, letting in a rush of cool night air that smelled of damp earth and cut grass. He held the marble up between his fingers. You see this? It's a marble. He drew his arm back and threw it hard. I couldn't see where it landed in the darkness of the front lawn, but I heard the faint thump as it hit the grass. There, he said, shutting the door and locking it. The heavy clack of the bolt sliding home was final. It's gone. In the yard. It cannot possibly roll back inside from there. Okay? Problem solved. He put his arms around me. I was still trembling. I leaned into him, wanting to believe his simple, rational explanation. Warped floors, drafts, tiredness. It all made a sort of sense. My fear felt foolish in the face of his calm logic. I nodded against his chest. Okay, I said. Okay, he repeated, kissing the top of my head. Come on, let's go to bed. Later. Much later. The house was submerged in the deep quiet of the early morning hours. In the master bedroom, 2 bodies lay tangled in sheets, breathing in slow, even rhythms. Downstairs, the newly installed doorbell camera, a small black eye Liam had mounted that afternoon, hummed silently, its motion sensor activated. The infrared light flooded the frame with a world of washed-out grays. The timestamp in the corner of the footage read 3:17 a.m. From the right edge of the frame, a small white underscore object rolled into view. It moved across the damp blades of grass, not slowing or changing course. It traveled with a steady, certain momentum, leaving no trail. It reached the concrete walkway. It reached the bottom of the 3 porch steps. Without pausing, it ascended, a tiny, soundless hop to the first step, another to the second, a third to the porch surface. It rolled across the wooden planks until it met the base of the heavy oak door. It stopped for a single second. Then, it pushed itself forward, tipping into the narrow gap between the bottom of the door and the threshold. The small, white object slid through the opening and disappeared into the house. The camera continued to record the empty porch for another 30 seconds before the infrared light clicked off, plunging the world back into darkness. The hiss of the coffee maker was the first sound of the morning. It was a good sound, a normal sound. I leaned against the counter in the half-unpacked kitchen, watching Liam. He stood with his back to me, shirtless, waiting for the dark liquid to fill the glass pot. He winced as he shifted his weight. "You okay?" I asked. He grunted, rotating his shoulder. "Slept like crap. This new mattress is like a rock." He reached back, trying to rub a spot between his shoulder blades. "My back is killing me." "Mine too," I admitted, the words coming out slow. The memory of the night was a dark smudge in my mind, indistinct but leaving a residue of unease. I had a weird dream. Can't remember it, just the feeling. He turned, the pot now full, and poured 2 mugs. The ceramic clinked against the granite countertop. He pushed one toward me. "It's the house," he said, his voice flat with tiredness. "Just settling in. New noises, new bed. It'll take a few nights." His logic felt right. It had to be. Yesterday's business with the marble was a product of exhaustion. Nothing more. We'd moved our whole lives in 2 days. Of course we were on edge. I took a sip of the coffee. It was hot and bitter. It tasted real. I held the warm mug in both hands, letting the heat seep into my fingers. Today would be a day of unpacking, of making this place a home. The bad feelings would fade with the dust. We drank in silence for a few minutes. The morning light coming through the kitchen window was weak and gray. It looked like it might rain. Liam finished his coffee and set the mug down with a firm thud. "All right, I'm gonna grab a shower and then I'll start on the garage boxes." He turned to leave the kitchen, then stopped in the doorway and stretched, his arms reaching for the frame. His back was to me again, the muscles in his shoulders and spine clearly defined. I saw it then. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. A shadow, but it was too sharp for that. Just below his right shoulder blade, a thin, red line ran diagonally down his back for about 5 inches. It was perfectly straight. "Liam?" I said. My voice was low. "Yeah?" He didn't turn around. "You have a scratch on your back." He relaxed his arms and tried to twist to see it. "Shit! Must have done it in my sleep. Told you I was tossing and turning." He ran his fingers over the area, his brow furrowed. He walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. I heard the shower turn on a minute later. I stood alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet again except for the distant rush of water through the pipes. A strange sensation started on my own back, in almost the same spot. A faint, persistent sting, like a mild sunburn. I tried to dismiss it. It was suggestion. He said he had a scratch, so now I thought I did too. My brain was playing tricks on me. But the feeling didn't go away. It was a low, steady heat under my t-shirt. I set my mug down. The coffee suddenly tasted sour in my mouth. I went upstairs. The door to the bathroom was closed, steam clouding the gap at the bottom. "Liam?" I called through the door. The water shut off. "Yeah? Will you look at my back when you get out? It feels weird." "Sure thing." He came out a few minutes later, a towel wrapped around his waist, drying his hair with another. He smelled of soap. "Okay, where's the spot?" he asked, his voice cheerful. I turned around, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I lifted the back of my t-shirt. "Right here," I said, pointing. "It just feels irritated." He was silent for a moment. I could feel his breath on my skin. The silence stretched. It became heavy. "Liam?" He didn't answer. I felt his fingertips. light and cold, trace a line on my skin. It was the exact path of the sting. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. It wasn't an exclamation, it was a prayer. I turned to face him. His face was pale. The look in his eyes was one I'd never seen before. It was a stark, animal kind of confusion. "What?" I demanded. "You have one too," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The same one. In the same place." I rushed into the bedroom, to the full-length mirror we had leaning against the wall. I turned and pulled up my shirt, craning my neck to see. And there it was. Identical to the one I'd seen on him. A single, thin, red line, etched into the skin, as if drawn with a razor-sharp stylus. It hadn't been there yesterday. I knew it. I would have felt a cut like that. Liam came and stood behind me. We stared at our reflections, at the matching wounds. "Okay," he said, the word a gunshot in the quiet room. "What the fuck?" He wasn't trying to explain it away. There was no talk of warped floors or drafts. This was different. This was on our bodies. He walked over to the bed and sat down heavily on the edge of the mattress. I let my shirt fall and turned from the mirror, the cold spot on my back now feeling like it was burning a hole through me. "How?" I asked. It was the only word I could find. He just shook his head, staring at the floorboards. "I don't know." That night, sleep did not come easily. We lay side by side in the dark, not touching. Every creak of the old house was magnified. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window pane in its frame. I could hear Liam's breathing, shallow and irregular. I knew he was as awake as I was. But eventually, exhaustion won. My eyes closed, the world fell away, and I was in the house. But it was wrong. Everything was water-damaged and rotting. The crisp, new paint on the bedroom walls was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing a black, mold-like substance underneath. The air was thick, with the smell of wet earth and decay. Liam was there with me. He stood by the window, but there was no glass in it, just a dark, gaping hole that looked out onto a dead gray landscape. He turned to me, his face a mask of terror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then we heard it. Keek. The sound was faint at first, the noise of a single finger with a long, sharp nail being dragged slowly across wood. It came from the hallway, just outside the bedroom door. Keek. Scrape. Keek. It was closer now, moving along the wall right outside. Liam's eyes were wide, fixed on the door. He took a step back from the window, toward me. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were nailed to the rotted floorboards. The sound was coming from all directions now. From the walls. From the floor beneath us. From the ceiling above. A chorus of slow, deliberate scraping. It was the sound of something patiently sharpening its claws on our home. On our cage, the bedroom door, which had been closed, slowly swung inward with a drawn-out groan. The hallway beyond was a pit of absolute black. The scraping sound stopped. For a moment there was nothing. The silence was worse than the noise. I held my breath. Liam reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. Then it moved. We couldn't see it. There was no shape in the doorway, no figure stepping into the room. But the air shifted. It grew cold. A presence filled the space in front of us. A concentration of pressure and intent. It was in the room with us. It rushed forward. There was no time to react. I felt an impact against my back, throwing me forward. The pain was immediate and unbelievable. It was not a dream pain. It was real. It was 3 distinct points of fire searing into my flesh. I felt the skin break, the sharp, wet tearing sensation. I screamed, but the sound was trapped in my throat. A silent gurgling choke. I was on the floor, on the rotting wood. The thing was on top of me. I could feel a weight, a pressure, but I could see nothing. Liam was yelling, his voice also silent, fighting against the same invisible force. I saw his body jerk and buckle. I felt another searing pain across my ribs, and another across my shoulder. 3 lines. Always 3 lines. I thrashed wildly, my hands clawing at nothing, my legs kicking at empty air. The scraping sound was right in my ear now, loud and triumphant, the sound of nails digging into meat. I woke with a gasp that tore at my lungs. My body flew upright. I was in bed. In our room. The sheets were tangled around my legs, wet with sweat. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. Liam was next to me, also sitting bolt upright, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with the same fresh terror. We stared at each other for a second in the dim light of the moon coming through the window. No words were needed. We had been in the same place. With a shaking hand, Liam reached over and clicked on the bedside lamp. The room flooded with a soft yellow light. The walls were smooth and clean. The window was intact. It was our room. It was safe. But we both knew. Without speaking, Liam turned his back to me. It wasn't one scratch anymore. There were three long parallel gouges running from his left shoulder down toward his spine. They were deeper than before. The skin was raw and angry, and at the top of each claw mark, a small bead of bright red blood welled up and began to trace a slow path down his back. My breath hitched. A whimper escaped my lips. I felt a burning, stinging pain across my own back, a sharper, more vicious echo of the morning sensation. "Chloe," he said, his voice wrecked. He turned back to face me. He didn't need to ask. He could see it in my face. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and pushed the strap of my pajama top aside. His eyes followed the path of the new wounds on my shoulder. 3 lines, deep and parallel, already beginning to bleed. He looked from the marks on my skin to my eyes, and in their depths, I saw the last vestiges of rational explanation die. There was no more denying. No more talk of mattresses or weird dreams. The dream was not in our heads. We carried its proof on our bodies. The wounds were real. The pain was real. We had been attacked. And whatever it was no longer content to just stay in the walls. It was in our sleep. It was on our skin. We stared at each other under the calm, yellow light of the lamp, 2 people marked and bleeding in their brand new home. The house was utterly quiet around us. The game was over. The hunt had begun. We did not speak of the dream. We did not speak of the blood. The morning was an exercise in avoidance. I found the first aid kit under the bathroom sink. Liam sat on the closed toilet lid while I cleaned the 3 gashes on his back. The antiseptic hissed on his raw flesh. He flinched, but made no sound. His jaw was a hard line. Then it was his turn. His fingers were surprisingly steady as he dabbed at the matching wounds on my shoulder. I watched him in the mirror. His face was a mask. I could not read his eyes. There was work to be done. There were boxes to unpack. That was the mantra of the day. Normalcy. We would force normalcy on this place. I started in the kitchen. The sheer number of boxes was a comfort. A task. A simple, physical task. I took out mugs, one by one, and arranged them on the bare wooden shelf of a new cabinet. I placed a single ceramic mug, one my mother had given me, on the very edge of the shelf. I stepped back to admire the small, neat row. I turned to the box on the floor, my back to the cabinet for only a second, maybe 2. I bent, picked up a stack of small plates, and turned back. The mug was no longer on the edge. It had moved. It was now 3 inches farther in, resting gently against the other mugs. My breath caught. I stood perfectly still, the plates heavy in my hands. The kitchen was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the mug. It was impossible. I had just placed it there. I knew exactly where I had put it. There was no vibration. No earthquake. The floors were solid oak. My hands are shaking, I told myself. You're exhausted. You put it there, and you don't remember. You're not thinking clearly. I placed the plates on the counter. I deliberately reached up and moved the mug back to the edge of the shelf. I watched it. It did not move. It was just a mug. I was losing my mind. That felt more plausible than the alternative. I worked for another hour. The rhythm of unpacking, lifting, and placing was a balm. Liam was upstairs. I could hear the faint, intermittent sound of a drill. He was putting together the new office desk. The sound was good. It was a man building a life in his new house. It was real. Then I heard him call my name. Chloe! His voice was sharp, annoyed. I left the kitchen and went to the bottom of the stairs. What's wrong? I called up. There was a pause. The drilling had stopped. Could you come up here a second? I trudged up the stairs. The fear from the night had been replaced by a low-grade, abrasive irritation. We were snapping at each other, tiptoeing around the unspeakable thing on our bodies. I found him in the spare bedroom, surrounded by pieces of flat-packed furniture and a constellation of screws. He was holding a power drill, frowning at a set of instructions. What is it? I asked. He looked at me, his expression softening from frustration to confusion. I didn't call you. I just heard you. You shouted my name. He shook his head slowly, his eyes wide. No, I didn't. I was about to ask you to hold this goddamn panel, but I didn't say anything. We stood there, the silence stretching between us. He was a foot away from me. I had heard him as clearly as if he'd been standing behind me. The sound had come from this room. He lowered the drill. You heard it too? He asked, his voice low. A cold wave washed up my spine. Heard what? My voice. Last week. The boxes were in the hall. I heard you call out for help. Clear as day. But you were outside taking a call. We had never mentioned it to each other. Another small, unsettling thing swallowed by the chaos of the move. Now, it was back. This house, it seemed, collected these moments. It held them. It played them back. Liam put the drill down on the floor. He ran a hand through his hair. Okay, he said to the floorboards. Okay. He wouldn't look at me. The work was done for the day. Normalcy was over. That night, sleep was not a refuge. It was a destination we were being dragged to. We lay in bed, the space between us a cold canyon. I did not want to close my eyes. I fought it. I listened to the sound of Liam's breathing, trying to match its rhythm, to anchor myself to the world. But the weight of the day was too heavy. My eyelids fell, and the house took me. The rot was worse. The smell of damp soil and decay was so strong I could taste it. I was standing in our bedroom. The walls were weeping a thin black fluid. Through the empty frame of the window the sky was a bruised purple. I could not move my feet. They were fused to the warped wet floor. Liam was in the room with me. He stood at the foot of the bed, his back to me, staring at the peeling wall. He did not seem to be breathing. He turned his head slowly. His face was smooth, expressionless. His eyes were mine. No, that wasn't right. His face was his, but his eyes, they were looking at me with my own self-doubt, with my own secret fears. He opened his mouth, and my own voice came out. It was a perfect imitation, a whisper that filled the entire world. You know he'll never get that promotion, my voice said from Liam's mouth. He's not smart enough. He tries so hard and he always falls short. The words were thoughts I had once had, in a moment of anger, a fleeting, ugly thought I had pushed away and never spoken aloud. Hearing them now, in that place, from his mouth, was a violation. He thinks this house was a good investment, my voice continued, laced with a cold, clinical cruelty. He doesn't see the numbers the way you do. He's going to run you both into the ground. He's weak. Tears streamed down my face, but they were hot, like acid. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him to stop, that it wasn't him, but another voice, a deeper one, was pinning me in place. The presence from the night before. It was here. It was wearing his face and using my voice to tear us apart from the inside. Liam's face twisted in the dream, not with malice, but with pain. I realized with a new, shattering horror that he was hearing something else, that in his version of this reality, I was the one standing there, my voice telling him his own deepest insecurities, the ones he'd only ever confessed to me in the dark. The thing on the bed was turning us into weapons against each other. I woke up with a silent scream stuck in my throat. My eyes shot open. The room was dark, but not the absolute black of the dream. It was our room. Liam was awake too. He was already sitting up, staring at me. His face, illuminated by the faint moonlight, was pale and slick with sweat. We didn't speak. The nightmare was too fresh, its poison still coursing through us. The things we had heard, the things we had said, hung in the air between us. An accusation. A betrayal. He reached for the lamp. The light was an act of violence, chasing away the shadows but revealing a starker truth. He was looking at my shoulder, the one that wasn't wounded, A cold dread, sharp and familiar, bloomed in my chest. I felt a deep, throbbing ache on my right shoulder, under the fabric of my t-shirt. A pressure pain. I looked down, slowly pulling the collar of my shirt to the side. It wasn't a scratch, it was a bruise. 4 distinct patches of discoloration were forming on my skin, just over the crest of my shoulder. They were arranged in a curve, the shape of fingertips, the shape of a hand that had gripped me with immense force. The skin was a violent map of purple and deep blue. I looked at Liam. His eyes were wide with a specific kind of horror. It wasn't just fear of the unknown, it was shame. His gaze flickered from the bruises on my shoulder to his own right hand, then back to my face. In the dream, he had seen me hurt him. Now awake, he saw evidence that he had hurt me. His face crumpled. The silence in the room was a physical weight. It pressed down on my lungs. "Last night," he started, his voice cracking. Did you hear anything?" The question was a plea. He was begging me to give him an explanation. Any explanation other than the one screaming in his head. That he had done this to me. That he had hurt me in his sleep. I stared at the brutal marks on my skin. I remembered the vile, intimate words spoken in my voice. The trust between us, the one solid thing in a world that was coming apart, had been fractured. I couldn't look at him. I just shook my head, a single, sharp motion. A tear finally broke free and traced a hot path down my cheek. My silence was an answer, and my tears were an accusation. I got out of bed, the sheets feeling cold and wet against my skin. I walked out of the bedroom, not looking back. I needed a wall between us. I went into the bathroom and shut the door, locking it. My hands were shaking too much to turn on the light. I stood in the dark, my forehead pressed against the cool wood of the door. I could hear my own ragged breathing. Finally, I turned and stumbled toward the shower. I needed the heat. I needed to wash this feeling off my skin. I cranked the handle, and the pipes shuddered as hot water blasted from the shower head. Steam filled the small room almost instantly, clouding the air, covering every surface in a warm, wet film. It was like breathing water. I stood there for a long time, just letting the steam build, not getting in. After a few minutes, I turned the water off. The room was quiet again. The large mirror above the sink was completely opaque with condensation. I took a step closer, my own reflection a blurry, indistinct ghost. I wanted to see my face. I wanted to see if I still looked like me. I reached out a hand to wipe a clear patch on the glass. But something was already there. Drawn in the thick layer of steam were letters. They had been written with a finger. The lines were clear and deliberate. 4 words. He did it. My mind refused to process it for a second. The letters hung there, a message from the hot, wet air itself, a confirmation of my deepest, most terrible fear. Then the air hit my lungs. I screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, jagged sound torn from the deepest part of me. A sound of pure terror and finality. The lock on the door rattled. "Chloe! Chloe, open the door! What is it?" Liam was pounding on the wood, his voice frantic. I scrambled backward, away from the mirror, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. He twisted the lock from the outside with a coin or a knife. The door flew open. Liam rushed in, his eyes wild. "What happened?" He followed my terrified gaze to the mirror. It was perfectly clear. The condensation had evaporated. The surface was clean, reflecting the small, white tiles of the bathroom, reflecting him, reflecting me. There was nothing there. The bathroom door hung open. The mirror was just a mirror. The tiles were just tiles. Liam stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his face a mask of confusion and fear. I was pressed against the far wall, my back cold against the shower curtain. The scream was still caught in my throat, a sharp metallic taste. He took a step toward me. I flinched. He stopped. The space between us was a mile wide. We did not talk about the writing and the steam. We did not talk about the bruises on my shoulder. We retreated into a new, deeper silence. The house had won the night. We spent the hours until dawn in separate rooms. I sat on the floor of the guest bedroom wrapped in a blanket. He stayed in the living room downstairs. I heard every creak of the floorboards as he paced. Each sound was an arrow in the dark. Morning came, gray and unforgiving. I found him in the kitchen, staring into a coffee cup he hadn't touched. We had to function. We had to pretend. We fell into a grim routine. I made toast. He poured juice. We moved around each other like strangers. After the meal, he went upstairs to the bathroom. I cleared the plates. I heard the medicine cabinet click open. A few minutes later, he came back down, holding a cotton ball and the brown bottle of antiseptic. He sat at the kitchen table, his back to me, and lifted his shirt. "Could you?" His voice was rough. I stood behind him. The 3 long gashes from the first night were angry and red. They should have been scabbing over, healing. Instead, the skin around them was inflamed, puffy. It looked worse. I took the cotton ball from him and soaked it. I touched it to the top wound. He sucked in a sharp breath through his teeth but didn't move. I dabbed gently, cleaning the lines of raw flesh. The antiseptic didn't just hiss. There was something else. A resistance. The skin felt hot, tight, like a drumhead. "It's not healing right," I said. The words came out flat. An observation. "I know," he answered, his voice low. "It feels infected." I finished cleaning all 3 marks. I threw the cotton ball away. "Maybe you scratched it in your sleep," I offered. It was a lie. We both knew it was a lie, a weak attempt to place a flimsy bandage of logic over a gaping wound of the impossible. "Yeah," he said, pulling his shirt down. "Probably." He looked at me. His eyes asked if I needed help with my shoulder. I shook my head. I didn't want him to touch me. Not after the bruises. Not after the mirror. I went upstairs alone. In the privacy of our bathroom, the one with the clear, clean mirror, I peeled off my shirt. The bruises from his grip were a constellation of deep violet and sickly yellow. I turned my back to the mirror, craning my neck to see the original wounds on my other shoulder. I had put a large square bandage over them yesterday. My fingers trembled as I took a corner of the adhesive strip and pulled. The bandage came away with a soft rip. I gasped. It was not infection. Infection was red, it was pus, it was swelling. This was something else, this was a corruption. The skin around the 3 parallel scratches was no longer pink or red. It had turned a dark, bruised gray. From the edges of the wounds, tiny, hair-thin black lines snaked outwards under the surface of my skin. They branched and spread for an inch or 2 in every direction, like the roots of a dead tree seeping into the soil. They were starkly visible against my pale skin, a network of black veins. A creeping darkness being drawn into me. I stared, mesmerized and repulsed. I touched one of the black lines with my fingertip. The skin was cold. Colder than the skin around it, it felt dead. "Liam!" The name was torn out of me, a raw shout. "Liam, get up here, look at this!" I heard his heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs. He burst into the bathroom, his face already white with alarm. "What? What is it?" I didn't have to say anything. I just turned my shoulder toward him. His eyes widened. He took a hesitant step closer, peering at the black lattice spreading from the wounds. He saw the cold difference. He saw it wasn't a normal injury. "Holy shit," he whispered. He looked from my shoulder to his own chest, a sudden, dawning horror on his face. He ripped his t-shirt up over his head in one violent motion. He turned his back to me. On his skin, it was the same. The same 3 angry welts. But now, they were ringed with that same unhealthy gray. And from them, the same black thread-like veins were pushing their way under his skin. They mirrored mine. A matched set. We were branded with the same creeping decay. This wasn't an infection. This was a contagion we had caught together. That night, sleep was an executioner. There was no fighting it. We lay side by side in the bed, not touching. The knowledge of the corruption growing inside our bodies, a chasm between us. The moment my eyes closed, the house pulled me under. The dream was different. There was no smell of rot, no peeling walls. There was only my own body. I was floating in a black void, but I could feel every inch of myself with a horrifying clarity. The dream was focused inward. I could feel the black veins on my shoulder, feel them moving. They weren't roots, they were worms. I felt them inching their way through my tissue, slow, deliberate. They were migrating, crawling down my arm, up my neck, across my chest. Then I looked down at my legs. The skin was translucent. I could see the network of black threads converging on my left calf. They twisted and coiled, weaving themselves together under my skin. It didn't hurt. The lack of pain was the worst part. It felt purposeful. The threads were spelling something, weaving a pattern. A symbol. It was a complex, alien glyph, made of living, moving darkness inside my own flesh. A signature being written into my biology. I felt a presence with me in the void. Liam. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there, experiencing his own version of this internal horror. I felt his terror as a low hum in the darkness. I felt him focus on the wounds on his back. I felt him realize they were changing, deepening. I felt his dream self trying to reach inside, to pull out the corruption. He imagined the gashes opening up, and in the dream, they did. He saw his own skin part, and inside there was nothing. No muscle, no bone, no blood. Just a perfect, starless, bottomless black. An empty space that mirrored the void around us. The house was not just in our minds anymore. It was hollowing him out from the inside. A silent, shared scream echoed in that internal darkness. Pain. Hot, searing pain woke me. It was on my leg. A branding iron pressed against my calf. I cried out, a real sound this time, and sat bolt upright, kicking the sheets away. Liam was awake too, grunting, clutching at his back. The room was dim, lit only by the faint pre-dawn light. My eyes shot to my left leg. It was there, the symbol from the dream. It was no longer under the skin, it was on it, etched into my flesh as if by a heated tool. The skin was raised, red, and blistered around a perfectly formed, intricate character about 4 inches high. It was a burn. It was a scar. A sigil. It pulsed with a dull, throbbing heat that radiated up my entire leg. I scrambled away from it, pushing myself against the headboard, trying to get away from my own body. Liam made a strangled noise. He was twisted around, trying to see his own back in the vanity mirror across the room. I saw his reflection. The 3 cuts were no longer just cuts. The one in the center had widened. It had split open, just a 1/2 inch long, but it was enough. The edges were pulled back, and underneath there was no red flesh. There was a patch of skin that was smooth, sleek, and perfectly, unnaturally black. It didn't reflect the light. It seemed to absorb it. It was the color of the void from the dream. He saw it. His face in the mirror crumpled. "No," he breathed. "No! No! No!" He reached back, his fingers touching the edge of the black skin. He recoiled as if burned. "It's wrong," he stammered, looking at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered panic. "Chloe, it's wrong." My own panic gave way to a surge of adrenaline. I threw myself out of bed, my legs screaming in protest. I stared at the raw, burned symbol on my calf, at the glossy black patch on his back in the mirror. This was happening. This was real. Our bodies were being rewritten. A violent, primal urge to reject it, to tear it out, seized me. I clawed at the symbol on my leg, my nails scraping against the raised, burnt skin. Pain shot up my nerves, but I didn't care. I needed it off. It was a foreign object, a parasite. My nails came away with blood and scraps of skin, but the symbol remained, perfect and unharmed beneath the mess I was making. Liam was doing the same, twisting, his nails scratching uselessly at his back, trying to scrape away the patch of alien flesh. He grunted with effort and pain, a caged animal trying to chew off a snared limb. It was useless. It was a part of us now. His frantic scratching stopped. He stood panting, his shoulders slumped. The new resolve hardened his face. He turned and strode out of the bedroom. I watched him go, my breath coming in ragged sobs. My mind raced. A symbol. That meant something. It had to mean something. It was a letter, a word. Information. I limped out of the room, past our half-unpacked boxes, to the small study. Books. We had boxes of books. I tore into one labeled college textbooks, throwing aside economics and literature until my fingers found what I was looking for. A heavy, dog-eared art history compendium and a world mythology encyclopedia. My hands shook as I flipped through pages, searching for anything, any culture, any script that matched the mark on my leg. Ancient Sumerian, Norse runes, Egyptian hieroglyphs. Nothing even close. I heard a sound from the bedroom, a drawer sliding open, the metallic clink of objects being shifted. I dropped the book and ran back, my leg protesting with every step. I burst into the room just as Liam was turning from his bedside table. In his hand was a utility knife, the kind with the segmented, retractable blade. He had clicked it open. The silver edge gleamed in the weak light. "Liam, no," I whispered. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on his own reflection. His face was a mask of grim determination. "I'm cutting it out," he said, his voice flat. "I'm cutting it off me. Don't! We don't know what will happen. He ignored me. He braced his left hand on the dresser for support, twisting his body to give him the best angle. He raised the knife with his right hand, the sharp tip hovering over the patch of black skin on his back. He was going to carve a piece of himself away. "Liam, stop!" I screamed. He pressed the point of the blade against his skin. The instant the steel touched the edge of that black patch, a sharp, electric jolt shot up my leg. I cried out and fell to the floor, clutching my calf. The symbol burned. For a single, blinding second, the intricate lines on my skin glowed with a faint, sickly green light. The light pulsed once, a soft wave of energy, and then vanished. Liam froze. He had felt it too. A tremor that ran through the knife, through his hand. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He saw me on the floor. He saw the afterimage of the light in my wide, terrified eyes. He lowered the knife, his hand shaking violently. He slowly pulled the tip of the blade away from his skin. The black patch remained, uncut, unmarked. We stared at each other's reflections, out of breath, covered in sweat and blood. He looked at the knife in his hand. He looked at my leg. I looked at the dark mark on his back. A circuit had been completed. A connection had been made visible. His wound and my wound were not separate afflictions. They were linked. They were two terminals of the same terrible battery. An attempt to remove one had powered up the other. We were tethered by the corruption. The knife clattered onto the dresser. The sound was too loud in the room. Liam stood, his chest rising and falling, his hand still shaking. He stared at his reflection, then at mine on the floor. His eyes were wide, not with panic anymore, but with a new, sharp awareness. The link was real. The current that had shot through my leg, the faint green glow, it was a message, a rule. I pushed myself up, using the bed frame for support. The pain in my calf had subsided to its familiar deep ache. Blood from my fingernails had smeared across the sigil, but the raised, burnt skin underneath was untouched. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that our bodies hadn't already screamed. I went into the bathroom. He followed. I took a washcloth, wet it under the tap, and began wiping the blood from my leg. He took another cloth and reached for his own back, twisting awkwardly. I saw him in the mirror. I stopped cleaning my wound, took the cloth from his hand, and gently started dabbing at the scratches around the black patch on his back. His muscles tensed under my touch, but he didn't pull away. We cleaned our wounds. We were a team again, brought together by a shared mutilation. An hour later, we were in the study. The sun was up, casting long, dusty beams through the window. Liam sat at the small desk, his laptop open. I stood behind him, my hand on his shoulder, reading over the screen. The frantic energy had cooled into a single, focused objective. We needed to know what this house was. "Okay," he murmured, his fingers tapping on the keyboard. "Public records. County Assessor's Office." The page loaded. Lot numbers. Property taxes. A chain of ownership that went back 80 years. Johnson. Miller. Clark. Williams. Us. The names were just names. The dates were just dates. It was a history of mortgages and sales. A clean, sterile list. "Nothing," I said. "Of course not. People don't list horrific spiritual contagion on the deed transfer." His attempt at a joke fell flat. He clicked on a new tab. He typed the address into a search engine. Dozens of links appeared. Real estate listings with sunny pictures of the life we were supposed to have. A few mapping sites. Neighborhood watch newsletters. It was all noise. Normalcy. "Let's try the town's newspaper archive," I suggested. Maybe there was a news story. An accident. Anything. He found the local paper's digital archive. It was a crude, outdated website. He typed in our street address. The search wheel spun. Then, a single result appeared. A headline from 1973. Local family mourns tragic loss. A picture of a family was next to it, but the image was a broken file icon. The link to the article itself was dead. Clicking on it just led to an error page. Backquote. 404 not found. Backquote. Liam grunted in frustration. "Useless. It's probably just a server error. Too old." He slammed the laptop shut. The click echoed my own feeling of defeat. We were hunting for a ghost in a machine that wouldn't even turn on. He stood up and started pacing. I remained at the desk, staring at the blank screen. It felt wrong. Not a server error. It felt like a door being held shut. I sat down and opened the laptop again. The search page was still there. I deleted our address from the search bar. My fingers hovered over the keys. What do you search for when you don't know what you're looking for? My eyes went to the angry red mark on my leg, the black patch on Liam's back. I typed in new words. The address. And death. The search wheel spun. Nothing new. I tried again. The address. And tragedy. Nothing. The address. And accident. Nothing. The address. And child. The page refreshed. This time, the link from 1973 was blue and active. The broken image file was gone, replaced by a grainy black and white photograph of a woman and a little girl. The woman's smile was strained. The girl's was bright. My breath caught in my chest. Liam. He stopped pacing and came back to the desk. He saw the photo. He saw the working link. I clicked it. The text was small, the scan imperfect, but it was readable. A pall has fallen over the community following the suicide of Eleanor Vance, 34, at her home. The article described how Eleanor had been found by her husband, how she had been struggling with severe depression following the death of her 7-year-old daughter Annabelle from pneumonia 2 months prior. It was a small, sad story, a local tragedy. We kept reading, scanning the lines of faded text for anything, any detail that wasn't just grief. And then we found it. A small paragraph near the end. A quote from a neighbor. She wasn't herself after Annie passed. The neighbor was quoted as saying, "She just shut down. She carried this little music box with her everywhere. It was Annie's favorite. Eleanor told me once she believed she could still hear her daughter's spirit in the melody. She believed she had trapped a piece of Annie's soul in it to keep her close." A music box. Liam and I looked at each other. The air in the room grew heavy. A specific object. A focus. It wasn't just the house. It was something in the house. Night fell. We didn't eat. We couldn't. We sat in the living room, the lights on, waiting. We both knew we couldn't avoid sleep forever. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on us. Eventually we went upstairs. We lay in bed, inches apart, staring at the ceiling. The shared knowledge of the music box was a live wire between us. When I finally drifted off, it was not into the familiar void of torment. There was no pain, no internal violation. I was standing in the hallway of our house. It was clean. The walls were painted. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows. It was the house from the real estate photos. The dream we had bought. I heard a soft humming. I turned. A little girl stood at the top of the stairs. She had blonde hair like in the newspaper photo. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at the door that led to the basement. She raised a small hand and pointed. A voice whispered. Not from her, but all around me. It was a child's voice, clear and sad. It's down there. The voice was a ripple in the calm air. Mommy hid it. Down there, where it's safe. I woke up with a gasp. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was from revelation. Liam was already sitting up, looking at me. His face was pale. The basement, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. A little girl, she pointed. She told me her mother hid it there, he finished. We had the same dream. A guided dream. It was a map. A key. A surge of desperate hope flooded my chest. We were not just victims anymore. We were hunters. We threw on clothes. Liam grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer. We stood before the basement door, a cheap hollow core door at the end of the first-floor hallway. I had my hand on the knob. Ready? He asked. I nodded. I pulled the door open. A wave of cool, damp air washed over us. It smelled of wet earth, mildew, and something old and decaying. A single, bare bulb hung from a wire in the center of the ceiling, operated by a pull chain. A steep, wooden staircase descended into the darkness. Liam went first, his flashlight beam cutting a sharp cone into the gloom. I followed, my hand trailing on the rough, splintery wall. The throb in my calf seemed to pulse in time with each step down. We reached the concrete floor. Liam pulled the chain. The bare bulb flickered to life, casting a weak, yellow light over the space. It wasn't enough. The corners of the basement remained choked with shadows. It was larger than I expected. And it was full. Piles of discarded junk were everywhere. Remnants of lives lived and forgotten in this house. Old furniture draped in white sheets stood like shrouded figures. Cardboard boxes, their sides soft and collapsing from the damp, were stacked precariously. A rusty exercise bike. An old television with a cracked screen. It was a tomb of forgotten things. "She hid it," I whispered, the words from the dream echoing in the space. "Where would you hide something you wanted to keep safe?" "Not out in the open," Liam said, his voice low. He aimed the flashlight beam into a dark corner, behind a stack of what looked like old tires. "We start looking. Check every box. Look under every sheet." The search began. We moved through the cluttered space. A bubble of light and motion in the deep quiet. The only sounds were our feet scuffing on the concrete, the rustle of plastic sheets, the groan of a box being dragged across the floor. Every creak from the floorboards above us sent a jolt through me. Liam worked with a grim intensity, tearing open boxes filled with old magazines, Christmas ornaments, clothes reeking of mothballs. I focused on the furniture, lifting dusty tarps, peering into the dark spaces underneath. The cold from the concrete seeped through the soles of my shoes. My leg ached, a constant, dull fire. An hour passed. We found nothing. The initial hope began to curdle into frustration. Dust coated my tongue. My hands were grimy. "Chloe," Liam said. His voice was tired. "Maybe we dreamed it. Maybe it's not." "No," I said it with a certainty that surprised me. "It's here." The dream was too specific. It was a clue. I moved toward the far wall, a section we hadn't thoroughly checked. It was piled high with flattened cardboard and a large, heavy canvas tarp that was stiff with age. It looked like it hadn't been moved in decades. "Help me with this," I said. Liam came over. We each took a corner of the tarp. It was heavy, and a cloud of dust billowed up as we pulled it away, making me cough. Underneath was a jumble of rusted metal shelving and empty paint cans. Nothing. I felt my shoulders slump. I kicked one of the paint cans in frustration. It rolled aside with a hollow clang. And behind it, tucked deep into the corner against the foundation wall, was something else. It was a small, dark shape. A wooden chest. Not big. Maybe 2 feet long. It was made of dark, plain wood, bound with simple iron straps. It was so coated in dust and cobwebs it almost blended in with the shadows. "Liam," I breathed. He followed my gaze, shining the flashlight beam on it. The light caught the dull glint of a small iron latch on the front. We stared at it. Neither of us moved. It sat there, patient, waiting. Finally, Liam knelt down. He reached out and wiped the dust from the lid. I knelt beside him. He looked at me, a silent question. I gave a single, sharp nod. He wrapped his fingers around the latch. It was stiff with rust. He pulled. It resisted for a moment, then gave way with a loud backquote, click, backquote, that echoed in the cellar. He lifted the lid. The hinges shrieked in protest. We both leaned in, peering into the darkness within. The interior was lined with a deep blue velvet, now faded to a pale gray and mottled with age, and nestled in the center of that velvet was a music box. It was silver, intricately carved with patterns of vines and birds. It was tarnished and dull in the flashlight beam, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. It was beautiful, and it felt ancient. It was the object from our research, the anchor of a dead woman's grief. The backquote cure backquote. My hand moved on its own. I had to touch it. I had to know. My fingers trembled as I reached into the chest. The moment my skin made contact with the cold metal of the music box, a white-hot spike of pain drove through the sigil on my calf. I cried out and snatched my hand back. Across from me, Liam hissed through his teeth, his hand instinctively going to his chest, right over the spot where his wound was. He looked at me, his eyes wide with pain and something else. Recognition. Confirmation. The pain was a signature. It was the same jolt, the same electric shock from when he'd tried to cut the black mark away. This box wasn't just an object. It was connected to us. It was the source. We had found it. We had finally found the heart of the curse. The pain receded, leaving a dull echo in its wake. We were on the grimy concrete floor of the cellar, kneeling before the open chest like supplicants. The beam from the flashlight wavered in Liam's hand, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls around us. My hand throbbed. I could feel the ghost of the jolt in my calf, a phantom twitch in the damaged muscle. Liam pushed himself to his feet. His movements were stiff, deliberate. He looked down at the music box nestled in its faded velvet bed. His face was a mask of hard lines in the harsh light. "We destroy it," he said. The words were flat, not a suggestion. A verdict. He took a step back, looking around the cluttered cellar as if searching for a weapon. A piece of pipe. A heavy rock. "No," I heard myself say. The word was small in the big, silent space. He stopped, turning his head to look at me. His eyes narrowed. "No, Chloe. That thing just electrocuted us. It's the source. It's what's been doing this." "It was her daughters," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pushed myself up, my knees aching from the cold floor. I pointed a trembling finger toward the box. "The article. Annabelle. She thought she trapped a piece of her soul in it." "I don't care if she trapped the whole damn Philharmonic in it," he shot back, his voice rising. "It's hurting us. Now." He took a step toward me, jabbing a finger first at his own chest, then toward my leg. "This is real. The pain is real. What are you afraid of? Making a ghost mad?" The question hung in the damp air. It sounded foolish when he said it, but the fear was a cold knot in my gut. We weren't dealing with leaking pipes or loud neighbors. We were in a place where dreams left scars. The rules were different here. A mother's grief, a child's spirit. Those felt like dangerous things to provoke. What if that's all that's left of her? I argued, my voice gaining a little strength. What if destroying it is worse? What if that's what unleashed the mother? We don't know how this works. "I know my back feels like it's been clawed open by a wild animal," he said, his voice low and tight with fury. "I know you can barely walk. And I know it all leads back to that thing." He wouldn't listen. He wasn't thinking, he was reacting. He saw a target. An enemy he could finally hit back. Without another word, he knelt down again, his hands reaching into the wooden chest. I watched as he carefully lifted the music box out. He held it in both hands, his knuckles white. He stood, and for a moment, just looked at it. It was heavy. Solid. A physical object to blame. "Let's take it upstairs," I said, my tone pleading. "Let's just think for a minute." He hesitated, then he gave a short, sharp nod. He carried it as if it were an unexploded bomb. I grabbed the flashlight and followed him up the steep, rickety stairs, leaving the pull chain light on in the empty cellar below. We walked through the dark hallway into the kitchen. The familiar hum of the refrigerator felt like a sound from another world. He placed the music box on the center of the kitchen table. It sat there, tarnished and intricate, an artifact from a nightmare placed squarely in the heart of our home. The moonlight coming through the kitchen window caught its silver surface, giving it a soft, milky glow. We stood on opposite sides of the table, staring at it. The silence stretched. The only sound was the faint drip of a leaky faucet and our own breathing. "A hammer," Liam said finally, his eyes never leaving the box. "From the garage. A sledgehammer. I want to make sure." "Liam, please," I started. "Just wait. Let's just wait until morning." "And let it have another go at us in our sleep?" "No. We end this now." He started to turn toward the door that led to the garage. And then we heard it. A faint backquote. Click backquote. It was a small, mechanical sound. Barely audible. We both froze. Our eyes were locked on the music box. The small winding key on its side was not moving. Nothing was moving. Then the first note played. It was a thin, plinking sound. A single metallic note, followed by another, and then another, forming a melody. It was simple. A child's tune. Something you'd hear from a crib mobile. But it was wrong. Some of the notes were slightly out of tune, creating a dissonance that scraped at the nerves. The tempo was slow, dragging, as if the mechanism were laboring through thick syrup. The melody was mournful, a hollowed-out looping lullaby that echoed in the dead quiet of the kitchen. We didn't breathe. We just stood there, mesmerized and horrified. as this dead object played its sad, broken song for us. It played through its melody once, then twice. The sounds seemed to soak into the very walls of the house, a soundtrack for our shared dread. Liam slowly lowered his hand from the doorknob. His face was pale. The anger had drained away, replaced by a raw, naked fear that mirrored my own. The music stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The final note hung in the air for a second, then faded, leaving a silence that was heavier than before. I swallowed, my throat dry. It wants something. We didn't destroy it. We couldn't. The act of it playing on its own had changed the equation. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a presence. We left it on the kitchen table. We went upstairs and got into bed, the door to our bedroom left wide open. We lay on our backs, side by side, not touching, listening to the small sounds of the house. We were waiting. I don't know what for. For the music to start again, for a footstep in the hall, for something. Exhaustion was a drug, a heavy blanket pulling me under. I fought it, my eyelids fluttering. But the weight was too great. Sleep took me. And the dream came. But it was not the familiar void of green light and tearing pain. It was light. Sunlight. Warmth on my skin. I was standing in our living room. The air was clean. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams were cheerful, not grim. I looked down at my calf. The skin was smooth, pale, unblemished. There was no scar. No sigil. No ache. A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed through me. Liam was there. He was smiling. A smile. Not the tight, strained grimace he'd worn for days. He was wearing a t-shirt. I could see the skin on his back. It was perfect. The black, dead patch was gone. The angry scratches around it had vanished. "We did it," he said. His voice was light. Happy. In the dream I knew what he meant. He led me to the garage. The big door was open, and the late afternoon sun poured in. In the center of the concrete floor was a pile of splintered wood and twisted, broken metal, the remains of the music box. He was holding a sledgehammer, resting it on his shoulder. We stood there, looking at the wreckage. It was finished. The curse was broken. We were free. The house was just a house again. Our house. Our home. He dropped the hammer with a clatter, wrapped his arms around me, and pulled me in. It was a dream, but I could feel the warmth of his body, the solidness of him. There was no undercurrent of fear, no shared trauma, just us. I woke with a gasp. My body was flooded with the phantom relief of the dream. Hope. It was a feeling so foreign I almost didn't recognize it. I sat bolt upright. The bedroom was dark. The house was quiet. But the dream felt more real than the waking world. Liam was sitting up next to me. In the gloom, I could see his face turn toward me. "You too?" he asked. His voice was just a murmur. "The garage," I said. "The hammer." "The wounds were gone," he finished. We didn't need to say anything else. It wasn't a threat this time. It wasn't a punishment. It was a promise. A demonstration. The entity, the house, whatever it was, it had shown us the way out. It had dangled the single thing we wanted more than anything in front of us. A normal life. It was a baited hook, but we were too desperate to care. The hesitation, the fear of angering a child's spirit, it all evaporated in the face of that beautiful, false promise. "It's the only way," he said, his voice firm with a newfound conviction. I nodded in the dark. "I know." We moved as one. We threw on clothes, our movements quick and efficient. We were a team again, united in a single desperate purpose. We went downstairs. The music box was still on the kitchen table, silent and gleaming in the pre-dawn light. It looked almost benign now, just a thing waiting to be broken. Liam went to the garage. I heard the scrape of metal on concrete as he found what he was looking for. I picked up the music box. It was cold and heavy in my hands. The silver felt slick, ancient. I carried it out to the garage, holding it away from my body. Liam had already pulled the main garage door down. The rattle and bang as it locked into place at the bottom felt so final. He switched on the overhead fluorescent lights. They flickered on with a hum, bathing the concrete space in a sterile white light. Oil stains on the floor looked like old blood. He was holding a sledgehammer. It wasn't huge, but the head was a solid block of steel. He looked at me. His eyes were clear. The fear was gone, burned away by the hope of the dream. I knelt and placed the music box in the very center of the floor. I stood up and backed away, joining him near the wall. This was it. The culmination of the sleepless nights, the shared pain, the creeping dread. It all came down to this one single act of violence. Liam stepped forward. He stood over the box, his feet planted wide. He gripped the wooden handle of the sledgehammer with both hands. I watched the muscles in his back and shoulders tense under his shirt. He took one deep, preparatory breath. He raised the hammer high, the heavy steel head glinting under the fluorescent lights. For a fraction of a second it hung there, at the apex of its swing, a pendulum of judgment. Time stretched. The air was thick. The silence was absolute. My eyes were fixed on the tarnished silver lid of the box. In its warped, curved surface, I could see a reflection. The reflection of the garage. The fluorescent lights. The back of Liam, arms raised high. Me, standing behind him, a small, still figure. And something else. Something standing right behind us. It was just a shape in the distorted reflection, a patch of deeper darkness. It had no face, no features, but it was tall, too tall. Its shoulders were wider than a man's. Its form was a wavering, inhuman silhouette that seemed to drink the light around it, a blot of pure black draped over Liam and me. It was there, in the reflection, in the room, with us. The hammer began its downward arc. Stop! The word tore from my throat, a raw, ragged shriek. Liam froze, the hammer held high. He turned, his face a mask of confusion. I didn't look at him. I couldn't look away from the music box. I raised a shaking hand and pointed. The reflection, I choked out. Look! The hammer fell from Liam's hands. It hit the concrete floor with a deafening clang that shot through the garage, a sharp, ringing sound that felt like a crack in the world. He whipped around, his face white, his eyes wide and frantic. He didn't see the shape. He only saw the terror on my face. What? What is it? I couldn't speak. I could only point a hand that shook so violently it seemed disconnected from my body. My finger was aimed at the polished curve of the music box. The reflection was gone. The garage was just a garage again in the warped silver. The shadow, the tall, wide, impossible shape that had stood behind us, had vanished. But its absence was a physical pressure, a vacuum where it had been. It was here. I knew it. My skin knew it. Every nerve ending was screaming a high, silent alarm. The instinct was primal. It bypassed thought entirely. Out, I managed, the word a dry rasp. Now. Liam didn't need to be told twice. He lunged for the small door leading back into the kitchen, yanking it open. I was right behind him, stumbling over my own feet. We didn't look back. We didn't dare. The sight of the sledgehammer lying useless on the floor, the music box sitting placidly in the center of the room, was seared into my mind. A failed execution. A botched rite. Keys! Liam barked, his voice tight. My jacket, by the door. We burst into the kitchen. The house felt different. The air was thick, heavy. Every shadow seemed deeper, darker. A switch had been flipped. We were no longer residents. We were prey. I snatched his keys from the hook on the wall, my fingers clumsy. The metallic jingle was a jarring sound in the pressing silence. Liam didn't wait. He was already at the front door, his hand on the heavy brass knob. He twisted. Nothing happened. He twisted again, grunting with effort, putting his full weight into it. The knob didn't budge. It felt like it was welded shut, a single, solid piece of metal fused to the frame. It stuck, he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and rising panic. He rattled it hard, the sound echoing through the foyer. Fucking thing is jammed. He let go and took a step back, looking at the door as if it had personally betrayed him. Then he turned and sprinted down the hall. The back door! I followed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I heard him reach the kitchen's back door before I did. I heard the same desperate rattling, followed by a curse. Son of a bitch, he roared, He slammed his fist against the wood. It's the same. It won't open. My mind raced. This wasn't possible. A jam, maybe. But both doors? At the same time, I fumbled in my pocket for my phone. My fingers were slick with sweat. I pulled it out, the screen glowing with an unnatural brightness in the dim hallway. I swiped, my thumb sliding across the glass, and hit the emergency call icon. I pressed the phone to my ear. A hiss, a loud, crackling static, like a storm of sand blowing through a tunnel. There was no dial tone, no ring, just a hostile electronic noise that scraped at my eardrum. I pulled the phone away, staring at the screen. Full bars of service. The Wi-Fi icon was lit, but there was nothing. A wall of noise. Liam, I said, my voice thin. He was still kicking at the back door. A useless, frantic act of rage. What? My phone. I looked from my phone to his face. It's not working. He stopped kicking. He stood panting in the kitchen doorway, his shoulders slumped. He looked from the door, to me, to the phone in my hand. Understanding dawned on his face, slow and terrible. No, he whispered. No way, not all at once. He walked slowly toward me, a man moving through water. He looked at the front door, then back toward the kitchen. It's not jammed. His voice was low, hollowed out. It's holding us. And then the humming started. It was a low, electric thrum, the kind you feel in your teeth more than you hear. It came from the living room. We both turned toward the sound. The large television screen, black and inert a moment ago, flickered. It pulsed with a soft blue light, then flooded with a brilliant, sterile white that bleached all the color from the room. An image materialized on the screen. The music box. It was a close-up, a perfectly framed shot of the box sitting on the concrete floor of the garage. I could see the grain of the wood, the tarnished silver, the long scratch across its lid where a key might have slipped centuries ago. There was no sound from the TV, just the image, silent, watching. Jesus Christ, Liam breathed. A new light flickered in the kitchen. We turned. The screen of the laptop we'd left on the counter was now on, displaying the exact same image of the music box. White light, silent picture. My hand was cold. I looked down. My own phone screen had changed. The dial pad was gone. In its place was a crisp, clear photograph of the music box. I felt a vibration. Liam's phone, sitting on the small table by the stairs, lit up. The same picture. We were surrounded. Every screen was a window, and every window showed us the same thing, the heart of our prison. The house was seeing through its own eyes, and it was showing us the warden. Then the image on the television screen changed. The picture of the box vanished, replaced by blackness. White block capital letters began to type themselves out across the screen, appearing with a soft, digital click for each letter. DON-TGO. A pause. PLAYWITHME. The message stayed there. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. An instruction. The other screens, the laptop, our phones, all flickered in unison and displayed the same words. The house was speaking to us in a single, unified voice. We backed away from the light of the screens, retreating into the deeper shadows of the living room. Liam grabbed my arm, pulling me behind the large sofa. We crouched down, our backs pressed against the fabric. Hiding. It was a child's response to an adult's nightmare, but it was all we had. We were in a cage made of drywall and wiring. The screens went black, plunging the room into near-total darkness again. The silence that followed was worse than the humming. It was absolute, all-consuming. We crouched there, not moving a muscle. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged. I could hear Liam's, a strained wheeze. I could feel the rough texture of the floorboards under my palms. I stared at the dust bunnies under the sofa, my focus narrowing to the tiny, meaningless details of the space. Then came the sound. From upstairs. A single, soft backquote, creak backquote. It wasn't the sound of the house settling, it was deliberate, the distinct noise of a single floorboard bearing a heavy weight. My blood went cold, my breath hitched in my throat. Liam's grip on my arm tightened until it was painful. Another step. A long pause. Then another. The pace was slow. measured, heavy. This wasn't a scurrying ghost. This was a slow, deliberate patrol. Each footstep was an eternity. We listened as the sound moved from what must have been our bedroom, along the upstairs hallway. Creak. Pause. Creak. It reached the top of the stairs. We could hear the subtle shift in the sound as the weight transferred to the first step of the staircase. One step at a time. Coming down. It was taking its time. It knew we were here. It knew we were listening. This wasn't a hunt, it was a performance. Step. Step. The sound reached the bottom of the stairs, hitting the hardwood floor of the foyer with a solid thud. It stopped there for a moment. We held our breath, the air burning in my lungs. I could feel my own heartbeat, a frantic, sickening pulse in my neck. Then the footsteps started again, moving from the foyer, across the hardwood, onto the living room rug. The sound was softer now, muffled by the carpet. But it was closer. So much closer. It walked into the center of the room. And it stopped. The silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It was a silence filled with a presence. The footsteps had stopped directly behind the sofa. It was standing right there, inches away. I could feel it. A cold spot in the air. A weight. A pressure. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing the tall, dark shape from the reflection. I could feel its unseen gaze on the back of my neck. Liam was rigid beside me, a statue of terror. We didn't breathe. We didn't move. We just waited for the hand to fall on our shoulders. The moment stretched into an agonizing, silent infinity. And then? Nothing. The pressure in the room lifted. The feeling of being watched evaporated. It was gone. It hadn't made a sound leaving. It had simply ceased to be there. I let out a shuddering breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Liam slumped slightly beside me. The immediate danger had passed. And that's when the music started. It wasn't coming from the garage. It was coming from the kitchen. We peered slowly, cautiously, over the back of the sofa. The kitchen was dark. There was nothing there. But the sound was unmistakable. The thin, plinking melody of the music box. The child's tune. But it was wrong. Horribly wrong. The melody was still there, but it was warped, as if being played on a record that was melting. The notes, bent and slurred, sliding out of tune. Woven into the simple tune was a grinding, metallic screech, a constant, abrasive hiss like dragging steel. Beneath that, a low, guttural hum, the sound of a sick engine struggling to turn over. And there was something else. Buried deep in the audio, compressed and distorted, were other sounds. The sound of a wet, tearing fabric. The faint, high-pitched echo of a scream, stretched and mangled until it was just another note in the awful symphony. We stared into the dark kitchen, paralyzed, listening to this broadcast from hell. The pieces clicked into place in my mind. A final, sickening revelation. The hope we'd felt, the idea that we could destroy the source and be free, it was all a lie. A trap. The music box wasn't the monster. It wasn't the source of the evil. It was the speaker. The antenna. It was the bars of the cage. And we had been about to break it open. The mangled music faded, leaving a high-frequency whine in its wake that drilled into my skull. The silence that followed was worse. It was a listening silence. Liam and I stayed behind the sofa, muscles locked, for a full minute. Then, another. Nothing. No sound from the kitchen, no footsteps. Just the low hum of the refrigerator. Slowly, like two old people with aching joints, we moved. We rose from our crouch, our knees cracking in the quiet. We peered over the back of the sofa. The living room was a landscape of deep shadows and pale moonlight from the windows. The kitchen doorway was a rectangle of complete blackness. The source of the sound was in there, lying in wait. We crept forward, our bare feet making no sound on the rug. We stopped at the edge of the hardwood floor, at the threshold of the kitchen. My hand found Liam's. His skin was cold, slick with sweat. We stood there, staring into the dark. I could see it now. A faint glint of silver on the kitchen island. The music box. It sat there innocently. It hadn't moved. The sound had come from it. but it was just an object, a conduit, a speaker broadcasting a symphony from a place we couldn't comprehend. We sank to the floor, our backs against the wall separating the living room from the kitchen. We didn't sit. We collapsed. The last of our adrenaline had burned away, leaving a residue of acidic exhaustion. We were prisoners. The failed attempt to destroy the box felt like a childish tantrum. We hadn't been fighting a ghost. We had been trying to smash the intercom system of our jailer. I stared at the box. Its polished wood seemed to absorb the faint light, giving nothing back. "If it's a cage," I whispered. The words came out thin, a dry rustle of air. My throat was raw. "If it's the bars, what's inside?" Liam didn't answer. He just shook his head. A small, barely perceptible motion. He was looking at his hands, as if he didn't recognize them. The hands that had held the hammer. The hands that had failed. The fight was gone from him. I could see it. It had been replaced by a hollowed-out acceptance that was more terrifying than any panic. Time lost its shape. We sat on the cold floor as the moon crawled across the sky, its light shifting through the windows. Every normal house sound, the groan of a pipe, the shudder of the air conditioner kicking on, was now a threat. We didn't talk. There was nothing to say. We were waiting for the next performance. It was Liam who moved first. He pushed himself up, his bones groaning. He walked into the kitchen. His steps were heavy, deliberate. He wasn't sneaking. He was walking to his own execution. He approached the island and stood over the music box, his shadow falling across it. "Liam, don't," I started to say, but the words died. What was he going to do? What was left to do? So poor. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't try to move it. He just looked at it. After a long moment, he picked it up. He held it with both hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. It was an act of surrender. He wasn't trying to break it anymore. He was trying to understand it. He turned it over in his hands. He ran a thumb along the tarnished silver latch. Then he flipped it, exposing its underside. "Chloe," he said. His voice was different. Not scared. Something else. A flat, clinical curiosity. I got to my feet, my legs unsteady, and walked over to him. I looked at the bottom of the box. The wood was dark, almost black. Etched into its surface was a series of markings. They were not words. They were not symbols I recognized. They were intricate, geometric patterns, impossibly fine lines and sharp angles that intersected and spiraled into one another. They were carved with a precision no human hand could have achieved. It looked like a circuit board diagram made by a madman, a map of an alien nervous system. My breath caught in my throat. I reached down and pulled up the leg of my pajama pants. On my calf, the burn scar from weeks ago, was a knot of pale, puckered skin. The shape of it, which had always seemed like a random, ugly mark, was there, right there, on the bottom of the box. Not just a similar shape. The exact same pattern, a flawless mirror of the scar tissue on my flesh. Liam traced the carving with his fingertip. "It's the same," he said, his voice barely audible. He looked from the box to my leg and back again. The fog of confusion in his eyes was clearing, replaced by a terrible, sharp clarity. "They're not a curse. It wasn't a warning." He looked up at me, his face a mask of dawning horror. "They're part of the lock. It was branding us, marking us as the key." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. We were not just prisoners. We were components. We were part of the mechanism. The exhaustion was too much. The revelation was too heavy. I don't know if we slept. I don't think so. It was more like we shut down. We ended up on the living room floor. Liam with the music box resting on his chest, his arms wrapped around it like a lost child holding a teddy bear. I was curled up beside him, my head on his shoulder. We were waiting for the sun, for daylight to burn away some of the shadows, but the light didn't come. Instead, the darkness deepened. The feeling began at the edge of my senses, a low hum, not in my ears, but in my bones. The air grew thick, pressing in. The room dissolved. The moonlight from the windows faded. The shape of the furniture bled into a uniform, featureless black. I tried to call out to Liam, but my jaw was clamped shut. My body was paralyzed, a dead weight on a floor that was no longer there. We were in a void, a place of no sound, No light, no sensation. I could not feel Liam next to me anymore. I could not feel the floor beneath me. I was just a point of consciousness floating in an infinite, silent ocean of nothing. Then, a light appeared. It wasn't a warm light. It was a cold, pure, white-blue fire, hanging in the center of the void, and inside the fire was a shape. It was vaguely humanoid, but long, elegant, and made of shifting, liquid light. It wasn't threatening. It was beautiful, and it was in agony. Chains of solid darkness, blacker than the void around us, were wrapped around its limbs, its torso, its neck. The chains all led to a single point, a small, dark cube that pulsed with a malevolent anti-light, sucking the very essence out of the being. The music box. A voice entered my head. It wasn't sound. It was an idea, a wave of pure emotion and meaning that crashed directly into my consciousness. It was a voice of immense age and power, but it was strained, broken. Free me. The plea was a physical force, a wave of despair so profound it felt like drowning. I felt its eons of captivity, the crushing weight of its prison. It was a victim, a prisoner, just like us. The house is the lock. The box is the heart of the lock. It feeds on your fear to strengthen my chains. The images flooded my mind, the nightmares, the scratches, the bruises. They weren't attacks. They were fuel. Our terror was being harvested, used as mortar for the walls of its cell. It will not let you leave. It will keep you. It will drain you until you are empty husks. And then it will find others. I saw flashes of other faces, other families, mouths open in silent screams. All of them, throughout the years, batteries for this ancient prison. The being of light strained against its chains. The dark cube pulsed, and a wave of pain shot through me, so intense my vision flared white. Break the heart. Shatter the cage. I aim of order, of peace. I cannot exist in this realm. I will return to my own. But I can unmake this prison. I will give you your lives back. I will give you silence. Peace. The promise was a balm on my terror-flayed nerves. Peace. The word itself was a prayer. To not be afraid anymore. To sleep without waking up screaming, "Free me!" The voice faded. The light vanished. The void collapsed. I woke with a gasp, my lungs burning. I was on the living room floor. Liam was stirring beside me, groaning. The first, gray hint of dawn was visible through the windows. It was over. The dream, A violent tremor shook the house, so powerful it threw me sideways. A sound like grinding continents erupted from the very foundations. Liam yelled as the music box was jolted from his grasp, sliding across the floor and slamming into the leg of a table. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down on us. A framed picture flew off the wall and shattered on the floor. The house was coming apart. "Liam!" I screamed, crawling towards him. The tremor intensified. The floor undulated like the deck of a ship in a storm. And then the voice came. Not in our heads. It came from everywhere. From the TV speakers, from our phones on the counter, from the walls themselves. It was a deafening, tearing roar, a sound so loud and distorted, it was pure physical force. Free M-E-E-E-E-E. The windows rattled in their frames, the glass bowing inwards. The kitchen cabinets flew open, plates and glasses cascading out and smashing on the tile. The house was destroying itself. It was going to bury us alive. This was the choice. Die here, crushed under the weight of our own home, or trust the prisoner. Trust the captive god of light. Liam scrambled on his hands and knees, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at me, then at the house tearing itself apart around us. He knew. We both knew. The dream wasn't a dream. It was an ultimatum. Break the lock! The voice bellowed, the sound wave knocking me flat. Now! Liam let out a raw, desperate cry. We have no other choice. He lurched to his feet, stumbling towards the hallway where we'd left it. He disappeared for a second, then re-emerged, dragging the sledgehammer from the garage behind him. His face was a mess of tears and dust and determination. This wasn't a choice made of hope. It was a choice made of pure, animal desperation, There was no other door. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to agree, for me to share the burden of this decision. I could only nod, a single, spastic jerk of my head, as another chunk of the ceiling crashed down near the stairs. The music box lay on the floor, vibrating intensely, the source of the earthquake that was killing us. It was the heart of the lock. Liam raised the sledgehammer. The heavy steel head rose high above his shoulder, catching the gray morning light. He took a wide stance, his body braced against the shaking floor. His knuckles were white. His jaw was set. All the fear, all the pain, all the sleepless nights were focused into this single, final act. He was aiming for the center of the box. He was aiming for the lock. He swung. The hammer came down. The hammer came down. It did not make a boom. There was no thunder. There was only a single, sharp sound of impact, metal hitting wood, dense and final, followed by a high, splintering crackle. The body of the music box exploded. Shards of dark, polished wood flew across the floor. Tiny brass gears and metal teeth sprayed in every direction, skittering into the shadows. A wave of cold rolled out from the wreckage. It was not a mystical chill. It was a physical cold, like opening a deep freezer in a hot room. It had no smell. It was just an absence of heat that washed over our ankles and crept up our legs. And then, everything stopped. The grinding noise from the foundation ceased. The roar that had filled the air cut out, leaving a ringing in my ears. The violent shaking of the floor ended so abruptly that I nearly lost my balance. A half-full glass of water on the end table, which had been vibrating on the edge, tipped over. It hit the rug with a soft, wet thud. The sound was deafening in the sudden quiet. I stared at the ceiling. A long, jagged crack that had been racing from the corner of the room towards the light fixture froze. I watched it. I did not blink. The line shivered, then it began to shrink. The white edges of plaster pulled back together, like a wound closing in reverse. The line became a thread, then a pencil mark, then it was gone. The ceiling was smooth, pristine, save for a faint layer of dust. Dust. It was everywhere. It hung in the gray morning air, a thick haze that caught the weak light. But it was not raining down anymore, it was just there. Liam stood over the remains of the box, the sledgehammer still held loosely in his hands. His chest was heaving. He was sucking in air in huge, ragged gulps. He looked from the broken pieces on the floor to the walls, then to the ceiling. "Chloe," he breathed. The word was not a question. It was a statement of disbelief. He let the hammer go. It fell from his grasp and hit the hardwood with a loud, solid clang that echoed through the house. The sound did not trigger another tremor. It just faded, as it should. It was a normal sound. We stood there for a long time. I do not know how long. A minute. 10. We listened. We heard the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. We heard the creak of the house settling, a normal sound we hadn't heard in weeks. We heard nothing else. The listening presence, the weight that had been pressing down on us, on the very air in the house, was gone. The air was light. It was just air. I pushed myself into a sitting position. My muscles screamed in protest. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, coated in a fine layer of white dust. I looked at my leg, at the spot on my calf where the burn had been. The pain, a constant, low-level throb that had become part of my existence, was gone. I hesitated, then reached down and pulled up the leg of my pajama pants. The mark was still there, but it was different. The angry, red, welted tissue was gone. In its place was a thin, pale, silvery line, like a very old scar. It did not hurt to touch. The skin was smooth, cool. It was just a mark now, not a brand. Liam stumbled over to me. He knelt, his knees cracking. He saw my leg, then looked at his own arms, at the constellation of fading bruises and scratches that mottled his skin. He touched a dark spot on his forearm, and his fingers came away clean. The bruise was a faint yellow shadow under the skin, nothing more. "It's over," I whispered. My throat was raw. The whispered words felt like sandpaper. "It's really over." The dam broke. A sound tore out of Liam's throat, a half-sob, half-laugh. He collapsed next to me, not with grace but like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He pulled me against him, and I buried my face in his dusty t-shirt. His arms wrapped around me, tight enough to hurt, and I clung to him, just as hard. We did not speak, we just cried. It was not a gentle weeping. It was a violent, physical release of pressure, racking sobs that shook our entire bodies. Hot tears carving clean tracks through the grime on our faces, gasping for breath between waves of it. We were two survivors clinging to each other on the shore after the storm had passed. We held on until the shaking subsided, until our breathing evened out, until there were no tears left. We were just two exhausted people, sitting on a dusty floor in the wreckage of a single, small wooden box. The rest of the house was whole. Slowly, we got up. We moved through the rooms like inspectors. The kitchen cabinets were closed. The plates that had crashed to the floor were gone. The tile was clean. The shattered picture frame in the hall was back on the wall, the glass intact. We touched the walls. They were solid. We looked at each other. The fear was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative wonder. Liam walked to the front door. Every step he took seemed deliberate, heavy with meaning. I followed a few feet behind him. He stopped, his hand hovering over the brass doorknob. This was the final test. The house may be quiet, but the real prison had always been the fact that we could not leave it. He took a breath. His hand closed around the knob. He turned it. There was a soft mechanical click as the latch disengaged. He pulled. The door swung inward, silent on its hinges. A rectangle of brilliant golden light flooded the entryway, illuminating the floating dust particles like a galaxy of tiny stars. The air that drifted in was cool and clean. It smelled of damp earth and grass. It smelled of morning. Liam took a step back, into the light. He turned his face up to it, closing his eyes. A smile spread across his face. It was the first real smile I had seen in so long that it looked unfamiliar. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. "We did it, Chloe," he said, his voice thick. He opened his eyes and looked at me, the sunlight making them shine. "We're free." I stepped forward and joined him in the doorway. The warmth of the sun on my skin was the most wonderful thing I had ever felt. It was real. It was outside. We could just walk out. Leave. Never come back. We stood on the threshold, two prisoners blinking in the sudden light of our own liberation, breathing in the air of the world we thought we had lost forever. I leaned against the doorframe, a laugh of my own, light and giddy, bubbling up inside me. It felt so good, to just stand, to just breathe, to not be afraid. I looked out at the front lawn. The grass was a vibrant green, sparkling with what looked like dew. The big maple tree near the street stood motionless. Its leaves were perfect, each one a flawless shape against the bright blue sky. Something was wrong. I tilted my head. "Is it windy?" I asked. Liam was still basking, his smile unwavering. "What? No, it's perfect." "No," I said, my own smile faltering. I took a step out onto the porch. The concrete was cool beneath my bare feet. "There's no wind, not even a little." He looked out now, his focus shifting from the general feeling of freedom to the specific details of the world in front of us. He looked at the maple tree. The leaves were utterly still. Not one of them trembled. "So? It's a calm morning," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. My gaze drifted from the tree to the sky. The sun was a low, golden orb, just above the horizon. It hung there. The light it cast was warm, but the shadows it created on the lawn were sharp and hard, like they were etched in place. I kept watching it. We stood there. I counted to 30 in my head, then to 60. The sun did not move. It did not climb higher in the sky. The shadows did not shrink or shift. "Liam." My voice was flat. He was already looking. He had seen it too. I could see the understanding dawn on his face, extinguishing the light of his smile. "The clouds," he whispered. There was a single wisp of a white cloud high in the sky. It was frozen, a painter's brushstroke left to dry. The silence pressed in. It wasn't the absence of the house's groan. It was the absence of everything else. There were no birds, no chirping crickets, no distant drone of a car engine or an airplane overhead. The world outside our front door was completely, totally quiet. Liam took a hesitant step off the porch onto the grass. He crouched down and touched a blade of grass. "It's wet," he said, looking at his fingertips. "But it's not cold." We looked at each other. The fragile joy from moments before had evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that felt horribly familiar. The house was not the prison. The box was not the lock. They were the keyhole. And we had just turned the key. We weren't free. We had just stepped out of the cell and into the wider prison yard, a perfect, sunlit, silent world, built just for us. The peace we had been promised. It was a photograph, and we were trapped inside it. I felt Liam's hand slip from the small of my back. He took a single, unsteady step forward onto the porch. He moved like a man testing the ice on a frozen lake. He reached for his phone, his movements jerky, automated. The screen did not light up with the familiar grid of icons. It flared with a chaotic storm of static, a blizzard of red and green and blue pixels warring for dominance. A noise, thin and high-pitched like a dying insect, leaked from the tiny speaker. He jabbed the power button on the side. Once. Twice. The screen stayed a mess of digital noise. He let his hand fall to his side, the phone still clutched in it. His gaze lifted, searching, and found the old grandfather clock in the hallway, visible through the open door. It was a heavy dark wood heirloom his parents had given us as a housewarming gift. A joke, they'd said. Something to mark the time in our new life. The long, ornate pendulum was still. It hung perfectly vertical, a motionless brass disc. The thin second hand was frozen, pointing directly at the number 3. It did not twitch. It did not sweep. It was an illustration of a clock. That was when the first real tremor of a new fear, a fear colder and deeper than the house had ever produced, went through me. I looked down at my own leg, at the bare skin of my calf where the angry branded scar had been only minutes ago. My fingers traced the spot. There was nothing, not a silvery line, not a hint of discoloration, not a single mar on the surface. The skin was smooth, warm, and completely unmarked. It was as if I had never dragged my leg against the hot metal in that nightmarish boiler room, as if it had never happened. Liam, I said. The name came out as a dry rasp. He was already looking at his forearm, where the map of bruises and deep scratches had been. His skin was pale and clear. Clean. Every mark, every puncture, every faded yellowing stain of a healing wound was gone. Utterly, impossibly gone. He looked from his arm to my leg, then back to his arm. The gears were turning behind his eyes, the horrible logic clicking into place. "It didn't heal us," he whispered. His voice was hollow. The words seemed to be physically scraped from his throat. "It didn't fix it." He looked out at the frozen, sun-drenched lawn. "It erased it." We stood there, on the threshold between the quiet house and the silent world. The sun did not climb. The wisp of cloud did not drift. A perfect, golden moment, held in amber, a trap. The realization was not a sudden shock, but a slow, seeping cold that started in my feet and crept up my spine. The box wasn't the source of the curse, it was a dam. A faulty, cracking, ancient dam holding back an ocean, and we had just taken a sledgehammer to it. We hadn't freed ourselves, we had unleashed it. I watched the house across the street. The Miller's place, a nice, 2-story colonial with blue shutters. As I stared, the ridgeline of their roof began to soften. It lost its sharp, defined edge. It sagged in the middle, like a line drawn in wet paint. The dark gray shingles began to lose their texture, melting into one another. They drooped, then stretched, and then they began to drip. Thick, syrupy black lines ran down the slope of the roof, moving with the languid pace of hot tar. A window pane on the second floor warped. It bulged outward, the glass stretching like heated plastic, distorting the reflection of the static sky. It held its convex shape for a second, then dissolved into nothing, leaving a clean, dark, empty square in the white siding. The siding itself began to run, the neat horizontal lines bleeding into one another, dripping white streaks down onto the brick below. "No," Liam breathed beside me. It wasn't a protest. It was a statement of horrified observation. The world was coming apart. My gaze snapped to the big maple tree. Its flawless leaves, once so unnervingly still, began to change. Their vibrant green leached away, turning to a sick, grayish brown. They curled in on themselves, crinkling and withering in an instant, the way a piece of paper does when it touches a flame. They didn't fall. They just clung to the branches, a canopy of dead, brittle things. The sky was next. The brilliant blue bled away at the edges, darkening to a deep, bruised purple. The light from the frozen sun shifted, losing its warmth, casting the silent, melting world in a strange, violet twilight. The air changed. It became heavy, pressing in. Each breath required a conscious effort, a pull against a growing resistance. It was like trying to breathe honey. We stumbled back, a single, synchronized step, retreating from the porch into the relative sanity of the house. Liam slammed the door shut. The sound was a dull thud. He fumbled with the deadbolt and shot it home. A useless, reflexive gesture of a cornered animal. We were back in the cell, but the walls were no longer the threat. The threat was everything else. I leaned against the wall, my heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. We had spent weeks, months, fighting the things inside this house. We never once considered what the house was fighting. It started in the center of the living room, above the spot where the music box had shattered. It was not a creature, it was not a shape, it was an absence, a pucker in the fabric of the room. A spot of blackness began to form in mid-air, a few feet off the floor. It was a perfect circle, no bigger than a fist. It was not a shadow. It absorbed the light. The purple sunlight coming through the windows seemed to bend at its edges and disappear inside. It made no sound. It just grew. The circle of black expanded, slowly, steadily. The hardwood floorboards directly beneath it began to sag downward, the wood groaning and splintering as if an immense, invisible weight was pressing on them. The grain of the wood stretched and pulled toward the hole. A fine layer of dust on the floor swirled, not from a breeze but drawn into a slow, spiraling vortex that vanished into the darkness. It grew to the size of a basketball, then a beach ball. The air in the room became colder. I could see my own breath, a white plume in the violet light. The objects in the room began to react. The glass of water on the end table slid toward the hole, tipping and spilling its contents, the water flowing not down, but sideways, toward the void, disappearing before it hit the floor. The cushions on the sofa began to depress, pulled toward the room's new center of gravity. It was a wound in the world, a puncture, and it was bleeding reality out of our home. It was not looking at us. It had no eyes. It had no mind, not one we could comprehend. We were ants watching the slow, indifferent advance of a chemical spill. We were simply in the way. Its sheer presence was unmaking the space around it. It stopped growing when it was about 5 feet in diameter, a hovering, silent sphere of absolute nothingness that warped the room around it. The walls seemed to curve inward. The ceiling bulged down. The floor was a shallow bowl. It consumed all sound. Liam's ragged breathing, the pounding in my ears, it all became muted, distant. We couldn't look away. We were mesmerized by the sheer impossibility of it. All our fear, all our pain, the nightmares, the wounds, it had all been a prelude. The whispers from a cracked door. Now the door was open. A thought appeared in my head. It did not come from me. It was not my voice, nor was it Liam's. It was not a sound heard with ears, but a piece of information placed directly into my consciousness. It was cold, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a geologic process, of a star collapsing. The dream is over. The dream, the shared nightmare, the house. It had all been a quarantine, a fever dream, designed to keep the infection contained. By destroying the box, we hadn't found the cure. We had killed the patient. We had woken up. I reached for Liam's hand. He found mine in the distorted, failing light. His fingers were ice cold, but his grip was firm. A final, desperate point of contact in a world that was dissolving. We didn't scream. There was no air left for it. We stood together in the doorway of our dying house, and watched as the hole pulsed once, a silent beat, and the world outside the windows finally shattered. The purple sky cracked like glass, and through the fissures, a pure, formless, sight-destroying blackness poured in. Our prison had not been the house. It had been the illusion of a world that made sense, and we had just broken the last wall.